Hi. Welcome to the lecture on Chapter 13, Project Stakeholder Management, the last chapter in the text that we're going to cover. Oh yeah, it's the last chapter in the text. So, we're going to try to understand the importance of managing your stakeholders, not just at the end of a project, but through the entire life of the project. Try to identify who they are, how do you keep tabs on who they are, what role they are, how do you want to communicate with them, and then kind of describe the contents of how would I incorporate that in a project plan, with a stakeholders management plan, understanding how to manage engagement with stakeholders, how to identify if there's issues and record in an issue log, methods for controlling stakeholders. And of course, there's always software to try to do this job for us. So what's the importance of this? Well, it decided to, back in 2013, the PMI Institute, a Project Management Institute, decided it was important enough that they're seeing a lot of failures in projects just based on managing who are important to a project. So the purpose is to identify all people in the organization affected by a project, to analyze their expectations, how to engage them. So, because we know that projects often cause change. Change in organizations, people get their lose jobs, different types of roles in the job. You're implementing projects, people don't want to succeed. So project managers kind of may be viewed as the enemy when you're trying to implement a project like this because of the impact on people's jobs, the company and stuff. But what we could be seen as allies if the project manager could show ways that, hey, this project's going to increase profits, maybe produce new jobs, increase pay for some people. So either way, a project manager, whether you're going to be considered as the hero or the goat, the project manager must identify and understand who these key players are and what to do to manage them. So examples of things that have gone wrong, change the way you work can definitely send shockwaves through an organization. So you have Donald White, defense systems leaders in Washington, D.C., describe situations that could lead to project sabotage. Buy-in blues. People didn't want to buy into the project. You're doing this just for short-term profits. You're not looking into the long-term. You're just an overachiever. I don't respect you. A lot of things that can go wrong as far as the project management is concerned. But so some of the processes that a good project manager will follow for the stakeholder management is, one, you got to identify who they are. You can't leave anybody out. You need to have a plan on how you're going to, and strategies and how you're going to engage these stakeholders. Of course, you have to, once you've identified them and made a plan to engage them, you got to manage them. You got to communicate with them to satisfy their needs and expectations, because each stakeholder has a different view of a particular IT project and what it's going to do for them or not do them. And then I've got to also control that engagement. I can't just, as a project manager, I just can't, told my boss this is what's going on, but I also got to manage my boss so that as things evolve in a project, he's not just making snap decisions based on status I'm giving him. So you're going to have to engage them and adjusting as plans adjust to keep them involved. So just as a summary, you can tell, when is this process involved? When do I manage the stakeholder? Start to finish. There's probably nothing in this project that doesn't require some aspect of managing expectations of a stakeholder. So some of the key things I could do to identify a stakeholder. One, you got a couple of different types. You got an internal and an external stakeholder. Internal, project sponsor, the project team, maybe support staff, internal customers, top management, functional managers. But externals can be competitors, suppliers, customers. All of those are, so you got to make sure you understand, are my stakeholders internal or external to my project? There are definitely other stakeholders, whether your company's big enough to have a program director, the project manager's family. Knowing that a project could be long-lasting, long-term, long hours, the family has a stake. Are there labor unions involved? Customers that you may sell business to. All of these are, potential stakeholders. So you got to focus on stakeholders with the most direct ties to a project. Now, one of the things I want to do is, once I've identified them all, I've got to make sure I've got ways of contacting all this information. So I need to create a stakeholder register, who they are, their position, title, contact information, what is their assessment information, what are their requirements and expectations, what influence may they have, and then say, gee, what's their classification? Are they internal, external, supporter, resistant? So you kind of understand where they stand in how this. So just give you a rough idea, their name, their position, internal, external, their role, contact information, email, phone numbers, text, whatever you want to do, whatever the means of communication that they designate. Now after I've identified them all, I may want to classify them. You can use a power interest grid to, based on their authority and how much power they have and how interested they are in the successful outcome. And then kind of put that on a little grid like this and say, hey, if I've got some of this high interest and high power, I'm going to make sure I manage them very closely. If I've got somebody that's not interested but a lot of power, I want to keep them satisfied. Sometimes you've got low interest, low power. I'm just going to monitor how they're feeling, give them touchy-feely, making sure that they're still okay. If they got a lot of interest but not a lot of power, I'll put them on the copy to list and let them, just to keep them informed what's going on, because they're interested, but they really can't affect the flow or change of this project. So this grid kind of helps you categorize how you want to manage each of your stakeholders. Now, of course, here you got different levels. I've got some that are totally unaware of the project exists, what its impact could be. Some are definitely going to be resistant. They're aware of the project, but they will not follow you. They won't do anything with you. They won't help you. They'll actually probably try to sabotage you. They're that bad. Neutral, they're aware, but I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to support you. I'm not going to resist you. I'm just going to wait and see. You've got some people that are supportive. They're aware of the project and they want to see the change done to the corporation, to the product, whatever the case may be. And then you got some that they're leading. They're aware of the project. They're totally engaged. They want to see this thing successful. So there are different levels for each one of these people. Now, there's definitely some things that went right. Instead of saying no when your project sponsor asks for something unreasonable, maybe it's to explain, better explain what is wrong with the request and then present a realistic, way to solve the problem. And usually I always tell my people, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. I mean, it's one thing to come in and say, it's broke. I says, okay, it's broke. How do I fix it? I mean, give me some ideas so I have something to think about or try to solve. But if I just come in and say, it's broke, I can't help them. So I always wanted them to come back. If you got a problem, offer me a solution, or at least say, hey, I think we need to, even if it's a matter of saying, I think we need to have a conference call with, customer A, stakeholder B, and discuss this. That's fine. But at least they made me aware of a situation and who they think they need to be engaged in this. So you get an example, Christina Ferguson, project manager, independent program manager in San Francisco, handled requests from a project manager to deliver a new tablet device. Basically knew the request alone would take months, but researched the fact, researched it before they made a snap decision, proposed realistic delivery schedule. So kind of reset the expectations and everything was fine. So now that you've identified and analyzed the stakeholders, you need to have a plan. You need to lay out a plan for the management team. And this management plan can include current desired engagement levels, interrelationships, communication requirements, potential strategies, methods for updating the plans. Now, sometimes sensitive information with your stakeholders, I may not want to make sure the sensitive stuff is included in all official documents. I want to make sure that only the level that kind of a need to know. Of course, you got to make sure that when you set your stakeholders, to make sure you correctly identify their need to know. Because sometimes you can get fired from a project if you think this person has no need to know, but in reality, they had all the right to need to know. So we just need to make sure that this plan identifies how I'm going to deal with sensitive information. Is it going to be written? Is it going to be oral? So you need to make sure you understand how's it going to be distributed. So this just gives you a rough idea of a stakeholder analysis, the name, their interest, what kind of engagement, and then potential strategies. And as you go through these strategies, you notice that not every strategy is identical. So you're kind of changing your engagement, your strategy based on the person and their power interest in the project. Because we know that project success is not just, hey, I met my completion date, boom. It's basically measured in how much is my customer or my sponsor of the project, how are they satisfied? Now, we know that some sponsors have, we rank them, yeah, you're sponsoring me, but you're not giving me much money. So when you look at this ranking, you need to make sure you understand what the expectations are, and sometimes putting a matrix together on how to pull that together can help a project manager get the right picture of how to manage each of the situations. So here you got scope, time, cost, standards, and what the guidelines are. Now, of course, with every communication and expectations, there's always going to be problems. So as with, change requests, we put a log together, document those. I want to do the same thing with communication. I want to document all the issues, and then track that need resolutions. And of course, unresolved issues can be a major source of conflict. If a major stakeholder doesn't think if their expectations are being met, they can make your life miserable. So an issue log is just one way of saying, hey, as much as I'm going through my project status, are there any communication issues, any stakeholder issues that I need to deal with and make sure are taken care of? And here's just a rough idea of one of those logs. So some of the best practices, all project managers are faced with challenges, and probably some of the biggest ones are not dealing with the technology, dealing with the management team, but it's managing the different expectations of the stakeholders, because sometimes you just can't meet everyone's needs. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you're clear from the start. You want to explain the consequences of certain things. Have contingency plans, because sometimes just knowing that you've thought about these issues and have ideas and plans can mitigate some of their complaints. you definitely want to avoid surprises. You don't want your boss to think, oh, I'm now sending my product from point A to point B by jet versus by boat. My cost is going to escalate, but whatever. So you need to make sure that you understand some of those. Now, controlling stakeholder engagement, I can't control all stakeholders, but I can't control what they do, but I can control the level of engagement. And basically engagement involves a dialogue, communicating with them to understand. So I want to make sure I understand where they're coming from and make sure we're both on the same page of where we want to go. So it's just making sure that right up front, right at the start of a project, you're setting the tone, expectations of what your stakeholders want. Just an example in this case is teachers. If I do nothing but lecture, or in this case, nothing but make videos, but I also get, but you just decide, if that's all I got to do is attend class, watch you listen to the video, fine. But if my expectations are I use a lot of activities and get everybody to speak, or participate online, then they've got different expectations. So you just need to make sure that everybody understands what that expectation is. Now, sometimes in today's world, text messaging is a means of communicating with a project team. Of course, there's always issues with texting and making sure you can communicate correctly in your understanding. You're all coming from the same point. And this example just shows maybe the text went to the wrong place. Who knows? But so just communicating. Sometimes you don't want to use text. And sometimes we tell our kids, call. Talk. I want to hear your voice. That way you mitigate some of those communications that texting can provide. Auto-correction. How many times have you typed something in and it auto-corrected your message and you sent it accidentally? So there's things you need to make sure of and you're doing the communication with your stakeholders, way to do it. Now, definitely ways to control engagement. One, you have a kickoff meeting. All key stakeholders should be invited and actively participate. I don't want them just to show up and say I was there. I want to make sure they understand what this kickoff meeting is, what the project is, what their expectations are, what my expectations were. So you just got to make sure that that is going through. Now, you got to emphasize the dialogue. Project schedules, deliverables, all the things need to be understood and how it's going to be delivered, and have that communication, especially in that kickoff meeting, so that all stakeholders know how the project is going to be managed, what activities are going to be, the costs, the timelines, how the reviews will be held, anything that deals with communication, they understand. Because stakeholders are probably, they may not be doing the actual coding of the project, but if you've got a president someplace that has the expectation of a project and you let them down, can be a problem. Example, Northwest Airline, now it's Delta, but they wanted to develop a new reservation system, but they made sure that they understood having them actually develop. They needed to make sure who was going to do the development of that interface. So, is there some software out there that can help with all this? Yeah, there's productivity software. Sometimes social media can help. LinkedIn has thousands of sites. I think your homework assignment for this chapter is going to be looking at LinkedIn and look at some of these project management groups. So there are ways of using software. A lot of it's social media to help. So it does come into play. So if that's the way your team is communicating, it's a perfectly viable issue. Now, granted, globally, there are tons of, not all software development goes well, and managing stakeholder issues is definitely an issue. So sometimes good, sometimes bad. So hopefully in this chapter you've kind of understood a little bit about managing stakeholders. It's the last of the knowledge areas that we're going to cover. So your process is you're going to identify them. You can make sure you got a plan. You got to make sure you know how to manage them and control their engagement. So hopefully that helps you a little bit with this chapter. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.